show. Now in studio, I'm joined by Roux. He's the chairperson of RTL Network and also works at SAMRO, as well as Leslie Perkis. She's the manager of RTL Network South Africa. We will be joined by Naima McLean, who's an artist on the phone, as well as Hlubim Mboya and Danny Kay a little bit later on. Now, can you just explain to us, Andre, perhaps I'll start with you, what RTL Network does?
RTL Network, it's a network of arts organizations, individuals and arts organizations. So you have the RTL Network of South Africa, and I chair the South African network. And we've brought together the major arts organizations like your SAMROs, Visual Arts Network of South Africa, academic and non-fiction authors, so more than 20 major arts organizations. And we also aligned to 42 chapters across the continent. So there's the RTL Network on the continent, and then there's the RTL Network in South Africa, which is like a cultural lobby, a coming together of artists and arts organizations.
Okay, we'll come back to Leslie shortly. We're now going to cross to Durban, where our reporter Nobuhle Nkoma is standing by. Now, you've spoken a lot about the kwaito element, the hip-hop element. Do we see a lot of Bollywood and Bollywood arts and culture there?
Yes, I know a young lady, and she goes by the name of Amina Bollywood Barbie, and she started her industry, the whole game here, and she says there's a lot of Indian movies that are shot here, and she's been a part of it, and many of them. So just besides the kwaito and all the other elements you find in Durban, there is also a huge Bollywood following, and there are actresses coming from South Africa here in Durban especially.
We're now going to be speaking of films. We're joined on the phone by Hlubim Mboya. She's an actress. Hlubi, if you can just paint us a picture of what it's like being an actress in South Africa 20 years into democracy.
Hi, Nzinga.
Hi.
I've been an actress, theatre, film and television, but mostly I'm known as a television soap star for 15 years now. And I can't believe how much access we now have, and I'm speaking as an actress in all those realms, of working and competing and creating international and local stories. And you know what, Zinga, I'm the kind of girl that dreams big, you know. I want to see myself traveling through my art and working with a lot of people through my art. That is why the NFVF is such a powerful tool for people like me who have a passion, have a skill, have a gift, but they don't know how long that lifespan is going to be. And institutions like the NFVF really opens up my mind to not only being in front of the camera, behind the camera, writing for us, how to produce the money to produce stories that don't necessarily have to be African anymore. And that's really what I really want to say to you, is that I see myself wanting to be known as an African actress, as a South African actress. But, you know, after playing a really socio-economic character on Isidingo for a decade, it's only a natural evolution for me to just tell a human story. So that's why the Durban, and you just spoke from a lady from Durban, the Durban International Film Festival is really where the party really is at. It's the biggest film festival in Africa, and it brings producers, directors, actors, writers, everyone in the field to Durban, where we showcase our own stories, documentaries, short films, and we get to see what's in the international circuit. And things like that really turn me on. They really inspire me, and they really motivate me. And I think that's the beauty of the freedom that we now are feeling, is that you've got to grab things by the horns. I believe that time doesn't stand still for anybody. And I want to be relevant in the times and the situations that we live in as a global citizen.
Okay, Leslie, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here. Hlubi sounding very enthusiastic and optimistic in saying this. Yes, we love it. We love it.
That's how I feel when I talk about my work, you know.
Yeah.
and the legacy of the arts in this country.
Yeah. Leslie, optimism, South Africa is much more open than it's ever been. Do you agree with this in all sectors of art?
Yeah, I must say, I said to Andre before we came on that things are much better. But since I was born in 1961, actually, South African politicians have sat on our country's imagination,
Absolutely.
and they still are. I'm not actually the manager of Arterial Network. I'm the campaign coordinator for Arterial Network's advocacy campaign called Why Should We Vote For You? And the reason that I'm here is to tell you about that. We, on the 1st of April, on April Fool's Day, even though it wasn't being foolish, we wrote to all the politicians, all the political parties in South Africa, and we asked them why we should vote for them as an arts constituency across music, dance, film, poetry, literature, all arts, including heritage. And we've got some really interesting responses from quite a few of the political parties. Some of the parties have relegated us to juniors, which we kind of expected. But some of them have given us substantial responses, and I think although we are being a little bit in your face and oppositional, we really want a conversation about our country's imagination. It's nice to hear, I can't remember the wonderful actress that you were talking to, what's her name? Klubi. It's wonderful to hear your enthusiasm and how your career has grown, and I think that that's really, really excellent. And I do remember democratic South Africa, how inaccessible things like funding for anyone who, pretty much if you weren't Afrikaans and white, was. The Nationalist Party really knew how to look after culture as long as it was their own. But unfortunately, in terms of freedom of expression and imagination and a bigger picture in South Africa, we're not seeing leaders across most of our political parties and our companies that really understand the power of imagination in South Africa and how much better it could be.
I'm just going to bring Klubi into the conversation.
No
Klubi, is this something that you agree with? Because you're speaking about government institutions.
I'm completely agreeing. What's the lady's name?
Leslie, yeah, agree with me, baby. We're in the arts together. This is what it's about.
I wish I was in studio with you. Are you in studio?
Yes.
Yeah.
I wish I was there with you. I completely agree with you. You know what? I was at the Durban International Film Festival, and, you know, we've got institutions which really are protective, well, they say in inverted commas, protective of, you know, the South African audiences. And it was really about, it was called Of Good Report, and it was really about the sugar daddy escapade that's going on with young teen girls, and it was banned in our country. You know what I mean? And it's exactly that she's talking about, that, you know, we need the mediums that open our minds and open expression and open dialogue.
Yeah.
And then, you know what was so amazing, that other countries, other film festivals bought it, they wanted to see it, and only then did we realize that we've got a real good story, that it's got socio-economical issues that we need to deal with.
Yeah.
So
and also, Klubi, you know what was so interesting about that film is that at the premiere of that film, even the artists and the other filmmakers, even the producers who were at that opening, because this isn't only an issue for politicians and leaders, it's an issue for artists as well. They didn't do anything. They didn't leave the room.
Leslie, we're going to cross to Nerea Hlakotza in the Eastern Cape to continue getting the views of South Africans on the ground. With regards to our arts and culture scene now, the Eastern Cape, give us an idea of what's happening there.
Good evening, Nzinga. We are here in Peterson in the Eastern Cape. Basically, it's in this area that you find a lot of artists, especially when it comes to the spoken word, which is your poetry. You find your traditional dancers who feel that they are basically expressing themselves and showing how the country has moved forward. However, when speaking to the individuals that are included or that form part of arts in this area, most of them indicated that they're still facing challenges. Most of them said the arts industry or even culture in this place is slowly but surely deteriorating. And they were saying that not a lot of local artists are rather emerging right now because of there is no confidence in them, especially when it comes to government levels. While we're speaking to some of the guests, they indicated that they would love the government to remember Peterson as an area in the Eastern Cape, and they were saying that they also would like to be your next Zaharas, people that are now well known. But in Nzinga, I'll just cross to some of my guests just to find out from them what are some of the challenges that they are facing, especially when it comes to the freedom of expression in this area. What's your take on this question?
To be honest, there is no support. There's nothing more I can say on that case. There's just no support. We need some support. The government should try pay attention to Peterson, not to Peterson only, to other places as well, just to give us hope as artists to keep on going, to uplift our culture.
And maybe if you can tell me, do you think that the arts and culture industry has emerged, especially 20 years into the democracy?
Yes, it is a lot. But in some areas still there are still challenges. Yes.
There you have it in Nzinga from my guests. They're saying that yes, the arts and culture industry is still existing, especially as another form of people, rather artists, to express themselves. But they're saying the challenges that remain are those some of the things that are just keeping them or killing rather their spirits. Back to you, Nzinga.
Andre?
Yeah, I think we've got major issues when it comes to culture. I agree with the actresses that we have new institutions. Some of those exist. But is the arts where we want them to be? The answer is no. Is the Ministry of Arts and Culture doing enough for the arts? The answer is no. Are these institutions functional at a national level? The answer is no. Your premier cultural institution, the National Arts Council, has gone through 9 CEOs in the last 10 years. Your Robben Island, your premier institution that's supposed to be one of our major heritage institutions, has gone through crisis after crisis. So at a national level, there are major challenges affecting the arts. And that's why the Arterial Network is there to lobby the current dispensation and the next dispensation so we can improve the status of artists and we can improve the role of artists.
If you were in government as Arterial Network, name 3 things that you would do that would change the problems that you see there.
I was in government. Number 1, I would appoint, if I was with the party, I would appoint a minister who is probably an artist or someone who understands the arts as well as administration. Number 2, I would fix the institutions by populating them with people that have expertise in order to be able to run arts organizations and understand what artists do. Number 3, I would focus not only on how much funding is available, but how adequately that funding is monitored, managed, and spent.
We're going to go to Hlubi Mboya, who's on the phone now. Hlubi, as an artist, what would you do in order to improve some of the challenges that you see in the industry?
You know what? We're here 1 minute, we're gone the next. You can be a media darling, a media sweetheart, and then they blow you down. It's about us being able to create a lifelong career out of our craft, and being educated, from high school onwards, of the avenues of which we can sustain ourselves and the institutions, and how to have access to institutions that can help us create work for ourselves. You know what I mean? Thank God that I not only act, I do other things in my life, because to be honest, I wouldn't be able to pay my bills with what I do. You know what I mean? And thank goodness there was a situation where I could do a soapy and that lasted a decade. But outside being a soapy, it's about not being called an actress and artist. It's being defined as a working actress and artist.
Okay, I'm also joined on the phone by Naima McLean. She's a singer and an actress and an artist. Naima, if you can just take me through what it's like being a musician in South Africa in democracy.
For me, in this particular context, it's a challenge. We're dealing with an industry that's very commercialized, so there are certain molds and forms that you're constantly feeling you have to sort of assimilate or adapt to, depending on what is acceptable for radio. And I think what that does is limit us from a content perspective. And when we're talking about democracy and freedom of expression, that becomes quite limiting. We have an opportunity to diversify in terms of sound and genre, and I often find that the gatekeepers of the audiences, which is primarily on television and radio, limit expression from a diversity perspective. So I think we are on the brim of sort of shifting those barriers, but it does take a lot of hard work and perseverance.
Now, this is something, Naima, that artists have expressed before, and people sometimes say, is it not preference? Like, if you're going to go onto a station that has a certain format, they're not going to perhaps play kwaito, and then perhaps a jazz station would play a certain kind of music, or is it a bit deeper than that?
Well, I mean, I'm of the opinion that the main stations that hit sort of national radio all have their particular formats, and we're not that diverse in terms of all reaching sort of national platforms. So yes, you can adapt to particular sounds for particular radio stations, but that still limits your access. So I think there needs to be space across radio stations, even if you're managing in terms of quotas, to allow for access to audiences in different spaces. And if I am only a sort of Kaya FM, for example, artist, that does just limit me to the Gauteng region, where if a Metro FM, for example, would play the same type of format, it would broaden my reach. So, I mean, that's just a personal opinion.
Andre?
I think the problem is much deeper than format. And something Hlubi said, you need to get access. And to get access and to have a long-term career, those that have a long-term career have access to education. Arts education is quite lacking in our schools, and that's been a major challenge. Also, and that the problem there is, in terms of the policy dilemma, is that you have a Department of Arts and Culture, but access to education is through your Department of Basic Education, your Department of Higher Education. Another challenge is in relation to certain aspects of legislation. And when we talk legislation, we talk copyright. Copyright is controlled by DTI, who is sometimes at war with the Department of Arts and Culture. When it comes to the format issue and radio and television, the major issue there is about local content quotas, and that's controlled by your Department of Communications. So you don't have interaction across the different government departments to understand what the sector needs. And that is a major challenge.
I'm hearing a lot of the problems that we have with arts and culture, and I'm hearing the struggles that people have. And I'm just wondering, perhaps, Andre, I'm going to pose this to you again. Being successful at anything does not come easily. Being successful as an artist does not come easily. Are we taking away the responsibility of people to struggle and get over things and blaming it mostly with government and the kind of problems that we've been seeing?
No, Nsinga, I think it's the artist David Kolwane that once said, I don't need the government to support me to be an artist. I don't need funding to be an artist. I am an artist. And we do have a wealth of cultural expression, we have a wealth of potential, and we have a wealth of resources. But the problem is, are those resources getting to the fore? Is the environment conducive?
We now joined on the phone by Daddy K. He is also a musician. Daddy, I want to ask you about your experience. You've been in the industry for quite a while now. Take us through the difficulties as well as the wins of being an artist in South Africa 20 years into democracy.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, I've been in the music business, I guess, for about 10 or 12 years. I can't really remember when I began professionally. But, you know, being a musician in South Africa really is a privilege indeed. It's not easy to make it in the music business. It's a tough place to break through. It's a tough place to get a deal. And I think it's also tough financially for a lot of musicians. You know, there's this belief that fame comes with money, but many of the artists of yesteryear, that grew up in the apartheid regime, had enormous fame, but often couldn't translate it to money. And I think the education and the business side, kind of just wasn't there. So I encourage a lot of kids that want to start off in the music business really to brush up on the business side of the industry and their ability to turn it into a profession that can put food on their table, feed their families, and pay their rent. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that faces most young up-and-coming musicians.
Leslie, I'm going to bring you in here. You were talking about your campaign and what you do in terms of education, and as well as saying that you were born in the 60s. It almost seems like there isn't a major distinction between the government of then and now with regards to artists and allowing people to be.
Look, I want to make it really, really clear. It's a lot better. It really is a more beautiful country. We don't want to go back there at all. But having said which, I do think that in some areas, and especially around the idea of imagination and arts, that we've kind of restarted. We started wrong. South Africa's whole visual language has been stolen from it. You had a heritage called Mapangupwe, where black people were working with gold. That heritage site was hidden from all of us, white and black. The knowledge about our own indigenous architecture, our own visual ideas, have been so kind of overwhelmed by colonial and American aesthetic and that kind of thing. And I think also that because of the overwhelming needs in our country, many leaders across politicians and business and other people of influence didn't really, and still don't really understand the importance of imagination. I mean, you've got, I think he's already ex or soon to be ex-minister Trevor Manuel, standing on podiums continually calling for imagination and saying we need things to bind us together. But he managed to leave arts and culture pretty much out of the entire National Development Plan, despite the fact that we lobbied them pretty hard to make sure that there was a 30-year plan for arts and culture. And we are not a priority.
To take a short break. Sure. SA Decides. We'll be back. If you'd like to join in the conversation, you can tweet us using the hashtag SA Decides. Do stay tuned to ANN7. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to SA Decides. Today we're discussing arts and culture in South Africa 20 years into democracy. Now I'm joined over the phone by Hlubi Mboya, an actress, Danny Kay, who's a musician. In studio I have Leslie Purkis, she's from Arterial Network, as well as Andre Roux, he's the chairperson and works at SAMRO. And we're also joined by actress Eda Rose and Naima McLean on the phone. Eda, I'm going to come to you. You're an artist in the sense of the word that you sing, you act, and you're an entrepreneur. Take us through that journey and why you do all these things.
Well, I think I do all these things because acting kind of is limited. Like, you only get as much work as there is work out there. So you need to become an entrepreneur because you have to do other things so that you keep having income coming in and you keep having things going on regardless whether there's work or there's no work. So I think that's it.
And have you found that the film, television and theatre industry in South Africa is growing and affords you a lot of opportunities? Lubin Boyer was saying that a little bit earlier on the phone. Or does it depend on who you know, perhaps your agent?
I think it's very related to your agent and who you know. It's really who you bump into and they believe that, you know what, this girl has talent. Let me give her the opportunity to audition, or let me just put her in that role. And that's what it boils down to. Obviously, it is talent as well. Yeah.
So I'm going to bring you back in here. Do we need to see almost groups forming, perhaps like actresses, like you and Edo will hang out and you will tell her what you know, she will tell you what she knows, and kind of help grow the industry like that? Is that necessary?
I think more important than that is that I want to leave a legacy for young African girls out there who have the kind of dream that I had and open up those kind of avenues. And it's all about education. I deal a lot with young school kids. I'm passionate about the African girl child. And it kills me that, you know, by the time they're 18 and wanting to leave school, they have these big dreams. And I was just like that. But as a 36-year-old woman, I sometimes have my doubts of, my God, is this going to sustain me forever? Do I constantly have to, you know, hustle, basically hit my head against the wall to be creative about creating my own work? You know, and as your esteemed guests in the studio, which I would have loved to be a part of, have said that it really is about educating people about what they can do to create their own dreams and create their own industries in the sense that they can be resourceful. And I'm all about just passing on, you know, the best buck for the African girl child. And I really believe in educating young girls or young people of how they can make the best out of their skills and their gifts and their crafts, so they can really, so that they can really dream big and really be the true successes that they want to be and that they've dreamt of being.
Naima, I'm going to bring you in here. You also sing as well as act. You've starred in international movies with Paul Walker before he passed away, as well as many more. Do you need to do more than one thing in order to survive as an artist in South Africa? Or as an artist, do you have a calling to place yourself in different art forms?
I do think you need to do more than just one thing as an artist in South Africa. I think a couple of people have already said that, you know, one stream of artistry can't maintain you from a financial viability point of view. And if you're taking something as a profession and moving into your world as an adult and wanting to create some level of stability around you, you do have to diversify. Me personally, yes, I have a calling for all the spaces that I operate in: poetry, music, and acting. But it also allows me to take charge of my life. So you're not waiting for work to come, but you're on the forefront of creating it.
Okay, Danny K, you seem to have mastered the art of being a musician and turning yourself into a brand, for lack of a better word. Do you also find that perhaps you have to think about doing other things than singing, or are you just focused on that?
Well, I think in today's day and age, multitasking is absolutely essential for staying around in whatever form, you know, whether you're an actor, actress, musician, sportsman. I mean, the world has shown us in South Africa how, kind of financially important that is to one's career. So, you know, I was a graduate at business school. I studied marketing, and I always saw, you know, myself as a musician, but also a brand. And I was very conscious of protecting my brand and protecting my profile and trying to do the right things and make the right kind of business decisions. But absolutely, I think why not? You know, music is what we do. But if we can put our name on headphones or we can do digital things, that's kind of the way the world is moving.
Okay, we're hearing that artists across these spectrums have to do more than one thing. Is this something that we're seeing in different parts of the world as you work on? You said you work with other people on the African continent.
Yeah, I think if you're an artist anywhere in the world nowadays, you can't just be doing one thing. You've got to understand, and putting my SAMRO hat on, we've got 12,000 members. For me, those are 12,000 businesses. Someone like Danny K is not just an artist. He's a brand. He's a live music performer. He gets involved in campaigns. I think Danny's even got some shoes named after him. I think that as an artist, you've got to look at those different avenues of being able to generate revenue and generate an income. What I was saying earlier is that it's not all the responsibility of the state, but the state has a responsibility to create that environment. Someone like Danny is at the top of his game because he works very hard. But there's also differences in understanding how the sector works. It's not all about money. In terms of the arts, we need to create an environment where the arts thrives, not just individuals and individual superstars thrive. If we're going to talk about acting and performing, what about our theatre environment where people cut their teeth? If we're going to talk music and performance, what about live music where there's artist engagement and you get to rehearse in front of people that you can feed off and grow? So I think there's a whole value chain. There's a trajectory where there's engagement needed so that an artist can start in terms of being educated and their career can have a lifespan beyond them having to die poor. They can generate an income and one is able to support that in different ways.
You know, is there still a perception, we were speaking to people across the country earlier on, is there still a perception that being an artist is either a little bit airy-fairy or not a serious profession?
I think it's definitely an airy-fairy type of concept, because being an artist, at the end of the day, we don't generally have like income coming consistently. It's not consistent, and you have to come up with your own things that you're trying to do, whether it's being on radio or designing your own shoes or acting now and then, being on cameos, whatever it is. You have to do a lot of other things. There's no way you can do one thing and it's going to be sustainable. It's not. It can be sustainable for 1 year, but then after the year it's something else. So you have to do a million and one things, and it's really tough, but we just keep trying, I guess.
But I think also, if I might jump in there, that you know, this constant thing of artists are airy-fairy or the work that we do is luxurious. There's a lack of respect for what artists do. Constantly, like at least twice a week, I get phone calls from people, and just about every artist I know does, asking them to please come and work for the exposure for somebody or for the platform for somebody. We die of exposure. I think this is really important to say, and artists must say no, that they won't do for it. We're lectured on the one hand that we must be entrepreneurial. On the other hand, what we do is precious. What if there was no music? What if there was no literature? What if there were no books to read? It can make a person like get a little bit riled, you know. You can get a bit cross. Kind of what we do is a bit essential, actually, and you can't always put a monetary value to it. Sorry.
The value of the first song that you listened to, the value of the song that you fell in love with, the song that played at your mother's funeral. What's the value of that song? And I think it's really reductionist for us to reduce arts to finances and economics.
It feeds our souls, but at the end of the day, we need to realize that feeding our souls does not pay the bills. So we need to be like, how are we going to make money from this? And that's what it boils down to.
I'm going to bring Danny K back into the conversation, as well as Naima and Hlubi. We seem to see an interconnectedness between the different art forms. Do we experience this, Danny, with music? Do you work a lot with perhaps your comrades who are in theatre, in literature, in movies?
You know, I think there's still a divide between you know, the kind of different sectors of arts and culture in this country, and I think it takes a few brave musicians. I know my friend Ed Jordan worked with William Kentridge, who I admire very much, and William Kentridge is one of those people who, you know, hasn't been scared to work with, you know, musicians in his plays, and I think the music world takes those invitations, you know, they welcome those invitations. I know I most certainly would. I'm a great lover of theatre, I'm a great lover of fine arts, and for me, as a musician, it broadens my horizon. I mean, I'm a terrible actor, but I love any chance I got to step in front of a camera, and I respect the art form. So I think we mustn't be scared of one another. I think even on the African continent, we live in South Africa, and only now we're starting to feel comfortable looking up north and saying, hey, let's work together. You know, we're all sons and daughters of this wonderful continent. Let's learn from one another. So I certainly think that time must come sooner.
Naima, as someone who works in both these fields, do you see this happening anytime soon, or like Danny K is saying, there is still quite a hectic divide?
There is a divide, but I think there's being creators and being creative, there's an opportunity for us to really just sort of bridge the gaps, and being somebody who sort of works between the spaces, that's how I'm able to maintain operating in all three spaces. So I just did a production, for example, with James Ngobo, and he allowed me to bring my poetry writing into the space and my music into the space. So, but you've got to be proactive about it. If I'm writing music for a film or submitting, you've got to find the spaces in which we can bridge this space of creativity together. It is going to take some time for the industry to sort of support those collaborative ideas, but I think increasingly institutions are beginning to do that with the exchange programs and different artistic initiatives that come out of residencies, etc.
Hlubi, you were talking earlier on about the fact that you want to travel with your work and you want to be known as a South African and African actress. Are we seeing enough collaborations between artists from here and the rest of the continent? And if not, why?
I definitely think so, and I think that's why I to go to any festival possible, because I really see that on a grassroots level. You know what, Nzinga, I studied third world politics and labor law at varsity because I wanted to become a diplomat, an ambassador to my continent, and I think I'm doing that in my art. I'm an activist, and I work a lot, as I said, with teenage girls, the African girl child, and basically I just want to leave a legacy that, you know, with hard work and perseverance and taking calculated risks, you know what I mean, and working hard, your dreams really can come true. And I want to be a beacon of light and a beacon of hope for all those people, because 15 years has not been easy, as I've said, you know, but I've never given up. And, you know, as your other guests have said, it's about networking, it's about hustling, it's about finding that open gap. And also, you've got to be in the right places at the right time. You know what I mean? You've got to do your homework. You've got to do your research. It's not going to come on a silver platter. You really have to go out there and put yourself out there, and maybe even make nuisance out of yourself. But I've never been shy to ask anybody for anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And especially not a job. So it's all about getting your initiative going and really being approachable and being accessible as well.
Andre?
Hlubi, as an artist, you are one of the best kinds of ambassadors that we have. And I think I just came back from a conference at the European Union, and they're talking about cultural diplomacy. And the three pillars going forward for the European Union deals with politics, economics, and culture. And this is 28 of the major countries in the world. Within South Africa and within Africa, I think there's a lot that we have to do in order to grow our understanding of global politics and culture's role in global politics. It's admirable that artists are starting to travel the continent. Their movies are starting to be shown on the continent. Our music is being shown on the continent. But if you speak to someone who's French, they have a French institute, an Alliance Française, that actively fosters their culture in foreign territories. You have the Brits, you have the British Council, you have the Germans with the Goethe Institute. And when you're engaging at an EU level, part of me feels very sad. We don't have a similar institute for cultural diplomacy in South Africa, let alone on the continent. So I think as artists, we do need to push those boundaries. We do need to make it happen. We do need to make those connections. HHP just did a walk between, I think it's Tanzania, coming down towards South Africa.
Throughout the continent, yeah.
And many artists are starting to do those collaborations. And I think it would be easier if we had the framework for cultural diplomacy, the framework for the arts, to foster a continental participation.
This is not something that I know a lot about, but do we also need to look at the context in which we come out of as a country and as a continent and say, perhaps there's a reason that we cannot have the something like the Alliance Française, because one, we haven't really colonized people for hundreds of years, and we haven't developed to that point where the kind of issues that we have are different.
I don't know, you know, I'd like to just jump in there and say that there was the birth of something called the International Marketing Council of South Africa, which a lot of money has been put behind, and it's turned into something called Brand South Africa. You won't often hear of Brand America or Brand England or Brand this or Brand that, although they may have those kinds of organizations as well. But they have a very strong understanding that it is by nourishing their film, their culture, their artists, their music, that naturally other countries will be drawn to them and be interested in them. They don't put huge amounts of crass money into branding and advertising that really increasingly doesn't work. And people all over the world are not so interested in those things. They pour money into theatre.
Into?
Theatre, into public art. They respect artists, they pay them, they work with them. In Australia, I met with some people who came here for the World Summit on Arts and Culture. And we were having a chat, and they said that they have programs that enable failure, enable experiments. Because without that, artists really can't grow. I mean, I'm being very utopian. I do agree that, you know, everybody struggles and artists aren't different from anybody else. We're housekeepers, we're bricklayers, we're senior executives, we're just like everybody else. But then if we are, then nobody must laugh when I ask an engineer to please work for the exposure.
You know, Nzinga, sorry?
I think that is going to come with time. The sooner we get comfortable with our own culture and get comfortable within ourselves, as you've said, it's going to happen. It's going to come with time, where we'll appreciate our own artists, our own actors, our own theatre. We'll appreciate that over time.
But it comes with time, and it comes with working towards it. And you know, there's a concept called soft power. And the French understand soft power very, very well. The Germans understand the soft power very, very well. They use their cultural diplomacy to get the into those countries. It's not about colonialism. It's now about trade, and it's about access to trade.
My point was the history and what we come from, and then asking if it's fair to expect that and...
I agree that we're shaping the country.
The oldest cave painting, the oldest abstract artwork is in a cave that Thabo Mbeki spoke about during one of his speeches. That's where we come from. That is from this country, and because of apartheid and other things, those very crucial things that this country is actually about have been swept aside. We need to take them back.
Going back to Thabo Mbeki, when he said, "I'm an African," I think he meant it. When he started building a lot of institutions, we recently did a project, a mobility fund to the UK and to African countries. The bulk of the applications were to go to the UK. Granted, it was a British Council fund, but I think as artists, we still see, or we think that our fortunes are outside of this continent. That's a mindset that needs to shift.
Definitely.
Imagine that mindset shifted, and we understood soft power, and we dreamt for a little bit. And imagine we spent half of the arms deal budget on the arts in South Africa. No, we need some protection.
I'm an artist, I'm a pacifist. I'm sorry, I'm a pacifist. I'll say it.
Half of the arts budget, if we spent that on the arts, how much would we be supporting artists instead of soldiers, instead of war? How much would we be supporting our kids? How much would we be supporting literature? How much would we be supporting knowledge?
Exactly.
Point taken. Klubi, I'm going to come back to you. We're talking in studio about Africans understanding soft power and diplomacy, which is something both you and Andre spoke about. Do we need to, earlier on I was asking on Twitter, people get upset when they feel like Americans are telling our story or people from the UK are telling our story. Do we need to guard who tells our story more dangerously, or do we just need to get the South African story out there?
As I said earlier on in the conversation, as I'm speaking for myself, I can't speak for any other actors or actresses, I want to tell a universal story. I want to tell the human condition story. I want to tell the emotional story. I want to tell a story of depth. I want to tell a story that empowers or motivates or encourages or doesn't on the flip side. I'm an actress. You know what I mean? I'm about imagination. I'm about creating things. And that's all I want to do. You know what I mean? And I think that's also, as I said before, after having a 10-year experience of doing such a macro South African and African HIV positive story that I think for me, and it's such a personal decision, that I need to evolve from that. That's why I can only speak for myself. And for me, I just want to tell street stories, urban stories, community stories, human stories.
Yeah. Naima, I'm going to ask you the same question. Well, it's difficult for you because you're American and South African, but...
Yes, I actually wanted to jump in there.
Yeah.
I'm a member of the African Leadership Network, and it's basically a conglomerate of thought leadership and people in different industries collaborating and trying to build ideas and projects around how we can build a African prosperity for Africans by Africans. So I agree completely with Subi in terms of telling the universal story, but I don't think we've mobilized enough as South Africans, as Africans, from a collaborative point of view around building policies that facilitate collaboration on the continent and allow us to really tell a multicultural African story enough. I think those things are happening increasingly, but I am half American, half South African, but my passion and my context and my understanding is an African one. And I'm more interested in a cross-cultural agenda on the continent than I am abroad at this stage. I think we still have a lot of work to be doing at home, and home I refer to the entire continent, to understand the 54 different cultures that come from the 54 countries that exist on this beautiful continent that we have, before we look to external Western spaces, you know. So yeah. I'm a real advocate for promoting the African story and promoting policies and institutions that build that journey.
Danny K, before we go and close the show, I just wanted to find out from you your final thoughts on what South Africa needs to do, perhaps, in order to continue this culture that we're seeing of art, literature, music, and dance.
Well, you know, I loved what Andre was saying. I loved what Leslie was saying. I mean, I think really, we need to take a very firm look at arts and culture in this country and our support of it from a government level. And my frustration very often as a musician is that we're still fighting with the radio stations in this country to even playlist our music. It's a constant struggle. Elsewhere in the world, the quotas are much higher, and we find ourselves not fostering the music business because our music can't get played, so artists can't get signed, so shows can't take place, and it's a vicious cycle. So
yeah.
I think the sooner that, at least from my perspective, the music business begins to acknowledge that, we can start heading in the right direction. But I think if you look at music in this country and acting and theatre and art, we're as good as anywhere else in the world. We no longer must perceive ourselves as second tier or substandard, and we must stop looking at international waters to validate ourselves.
Fantastic, Danny. I'm going to ask you to leave it there. And I'd also like to thank our guest, Danny K. He's a musician, Hlubi Mboya, an actress, and Naima McLean, an actress and a musician. Ida, we have very little time. Please tell me your final thoughts.
I'm going to add to what Danny K. say. I think that as a population, as people, we need to appreciate ourselves. And as soon as we appreciate ourselves, we appreciate our culture, the different people that make music, the different actors, and different types of entrepreneurship and creativity that they come with. And once we appreciate that, then we'll appreciate our artists, and that's when our art and culture will grow. I only think then.
Leslie.
I'm impatient. I can't help it.
Very
I'm
briefly,
overexcited.
Very briefly, your closing remarks.
Artists must have fun. I've got hard work to do.
Okay, Andre?
I'm reading a book at the moment called The Dwarfing of Europe, and Europeans realize they're on the decline. In South Africa, in Africa, they know they need a new story, a new narrative. We need to put the new narrative and the new story in the hands of artists, not of politicians. And I think that goes with the support for artists. If we're going to build a new narrative, a new story for Africa, for South Africa, we need to do it through the arts.
Amazing. Thank you so much to all my guests who came in and gave us very interesting and insightful looks into arts and culture in South Africa. Thank you for watching SA Decide.